For over 15 years, you've believed in a carefully crafted story. But what if the real goal was always to stop you from asking the questions that truly matter? Picture a stage, perfectly positioned lights, a set meticulously arranged, everything flawless. At the center, a missing child. In front, two parents with teary eyes and perfectly rehearsed speeches. Around them, journalists, cameras, headlines with words like despair, mystery, hope. The audience, the entire world, watches in silence, and no one dares to stand up. Now take a deep breath. What if I told you that this stage was set up so carefully that even the doubts were scripted? Since 2007, the story of Madeleine McCann has been told in an almost cinematic way. A British family on vacation in Portugal, a casual dinner with friends, a little girl who vanishes while sleeping, and a global search that never found answers. This story went around the world. It entered homes, newspaper covers, bar conversations, and it became a consensus. A tragedy without culprits. But there's something about this narrative that's been unsettling from the start. Something no one dared to say out loud. Because while everyone repeated the same version, important questions were brushed aside. Some silenced, others dismissed as irrelevant. And that's where the question that really matters comes in. What if the story we've believed for over 15 years was constructed? Not to tell the truth, but to ensure certain questions were never asked. Not because there weren't clues, but because the right story needed to be the easiest one to swallow. The hardest pain to face is the one without answers. And it's exactly that pain that turned the Madeleine case into a symbol of the uncertainty that paralyzes, the mystery that becomes comfort, and the story told so many times that no one remembers where the first doubts came from. But the truth is, the gaps were always there. Timelines that don't add up, testimonies that shift, uncomfortable silences in moments that demanded despair. And the most painful part, a little girl who disappeared, but was also swallowed by a narrative so solid it became a fortress. A story too polished to be dismantled, and too comfortable to be questioned. But if we stop to listen to what was never said, maybe the silence speaks louder than any headline. From now on, we're going to break down every piece of this story, not to create theories, but to understand why it never truly made sense. And if you feel like there's something there that no one's told you, you're in the right place. Subscribe, because what's coming next isn't comfortable, it's necessary. It was a quiet night with clear skies and mild temperatures in southern Portugal. The kind of night where families relax, kids go to bed early, and adults enjoy the stillness of vacation. In apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Madeleine McCann, 3 years old, was sleeping in the room next to her twin siblings. Meanwhile, her parents, Kate and Jerry, were dining with friends just a few meters away at the resort's restaurant, known as the Tapas Bar. They had agreed to take turns checking on the kids, going to the apartment every half hour to make sure they were okay. That's the foundation of the story the whole world knows. That same night, according to the accounts, at 10 p.m., Kate enters the room, finds the window open, the shutters raised, and Madeleine's bed empty. It's at that moment, she says, that the phrase that would define everything emerges. They've taken her. Someone's taken her. In seconds, what would become one of the most expensive, media-driven, and emotionally charged searches on the planet begins, and the world stops to watch. But there's a detail almost no one noticed. This story was never just about a little girl's disappearance. From the start, it was built as a narrative, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an open-ended conclusion, but already shaped so no one would question the framework. Why? Because in the face of tragedy, humans need order, logic, explanation. And if the truth is chaotic, unstable, or worse, too uncomfortable, society finds a way to craft a version that brings relief. As Nietzsche said, truth is a necessary illusion. And maybe in this case, the official story was just that, an illusion that calmed the world but didn't reveal what really happened. From day one, the media treated this case like a movie script, and everything seemed to fit. The image of the smiling little girl with big eyes and a mark in her eye that made her unique. The parents, upper-middle-class British doctors, composed, controlled, articulate, and the invisible villain, the abductor who supposedly broke into an apartment in a family resort and escaped without a trace. It was the perfect story, or rather, the perfect story to distract. Because if you look closely, you'll see that the elements of this narrative, in reality, they were assumptions. No one saw the window being opened. There's no eyewitness to the supposed abduction, and the accounts from the parents and their friends about what happened that night changed more than once. Even so, the narrative was repeated until it became unassailable. The British press made sure to frame the McCanns as victims beyond any suspicion. The Portuguese police, on the other hand, who initially spotted inconsistencies in the parents' story, were discredited, attacked, and soon silenced. And here's another layer to the problem: the way public opinion settled in. The idea that Madeleine was abducted is painful, yes, but it's also simple. It's an explanation with a beginning, parents step out, a middle, someone breaks in, and an end, the girl. But it's digestible. The other possibility, the one where things didn't happen as they said, where there are omissions, contradictions, maybe even something that should never be uncovered, that version doesn't just cause pain, it sparks anger, guilt, shame, and above all, it forces people to rethink everything they've believed for over a decade. But that deconstruction is full of signs. You're about to start seeing how the pieces of this story that seems so neatly assembled never truly fit. And once you see it for the first time, it's impossible to unsee. It was supposed to be simple: an open window, a silent abduction, a child taken in the night without a trace. But with every detail repeated, every phrase retold, the story starts to crack. The first version said Madeleine's bedroom window had been forced open, that the abductor came in that way. But the forensics found no signs of a break-in, no marks, no tools, just the mother's fingerprints. Kate's. That would be the first crack. The second came right after: the timelines. The friends said they checked on the kids every half hour, but the accounts of who saw whom and when shifted. The statements became malleable, like clay shaped by circumstances. And oddly, that was accepted. You know that feeling when things don't add up? When something's off but no one seems to notice? That's exactly it. The Portuguese police noticed. But as soon as the questions started pointing toward the parents, something changed. The British presence grew. Diplomats arrived, and the narrative aligned. It was an abduction. From then on, what was suspicion became inconvenience, and what was inconvenient was forgotten. The media reinforced this script. Photos of Madeleine smiling, parents crying with dignity, an innocent child, an invisible villain. The perfect story for headlines. Anything that strayed from it was deemed sensationalism or conspiracy theory. But what if the real sensationalism was how easily this version was sold? Over time, the holes in the official narrative didn't shrink. They were just ignored. The room where Madeleine slept was altered before forensics got there. The crime scene was contaminated by people coming and going. And still, the investigation went on as if nothing had compromised the evidence. The sniffer dogs detected traces of blood and the scent of a corpse in the apartment and in a car rented by the McCanns weeks later. And even then, the explanation was coincidence. You know when everything points to something, but no one wants to look. It's like the truth is standing in the middle of the room, but everyone's turning their heads at the same time. That wasn't by accident. There's a name for it: cognitive dissonance. When reality clashes with what we believe, our brains try to protect the image we've already built. After all, how do you accept that the parents, doctors, British, respectable, might be involved in something so brutal? It's easier to believe a comforting version, easier to repeat a soothing lie than to face a devastating possibility. And that's where the power of narrative comes in. As Foucault said, whoever controls a story controls what's true. The official version of this case was solidified not because it was the most accurate, but because it was the most convenient. It protected the family's image. It avoided a diplomatic scandal. It shielded institutions. And most importantly, it dodged questions no one wanted to answer. The mainstream media did what it always does when discomfort threatens to spill over. It embraced the most palatable script. It rejected the uncomfortable. And without realizing it, it helped erase part of the story. In this scenario, the public was left with the tip of the iceberg, the visible, pretty acceptable part. But what lay beneath the surface was buried in silence. But that silence was never neutral. It protects, it hides, and sometimes it reveals more than any words. Engaging transition to the next segment. What if this story, told the right way for so many years, wasn't just an attempt at explanation, but a distraction strategy? Let's uncover what's been hidden behind the story the whole world learned to repeat, even if it never understood it. Imagine for a second that the story you've heard for years, the one that seemed to make the most sense, the one they made you repeat almost without noticing, was just the part they let you see, the calm surface of a lake. But down below, deep down, something much bigger was moving in silence. All along, the official version seemed solid. A tragedy without culprits, an invisible villain, parents victimized by a cruel fate. But when the pieces stop fitting, the feeling shifts. It's as if someone assembled this puzzle with pieces from different boxes just to keep you from what really matters. When you look closer, this is where what seemed like mistakes starts to look like choices. The decision not to question the parents deeply, the rush to dismiss evidence that didn't fit the public version, the media shield that turned any questioning into cruelty. It all follows a pattern, and patterns don't happen by chance. The characters react like they're under a pressure no one can see. The picture-perfect family portrait starts to crack. And the strangest part, it wasn't a scandal that brought the narrative down. It was the silence, a heavy silence, full of absences, documents that vanished, evidence that never reached the press, questions dodged with a simple, "that doesn't help anything." And it's in that space of silence that a lot happens. Because little by little, the public started to notice. Comments on news stories, forums filled with doubts that didn't fit, and above all, comparisons to other cases of poor families without political support who were investigated to exhaustion for far less. And that's where the discomfort creeps in. The truth that took shape there maybe wasn't the truth justice needed. It was the truth that protected, that spared, that kept intact what couldn't be broken. And that realization, as harsh as it is, changes everything. It's no longer about what happened. It's about who chose what could be said and what had to be silenced. Now, if you thought that was enough, wait until you see what this protection hid. The iceberg image makes the most sense here. For years, what they showed us was the visible part, the part that fit on the 8 o'clock news. The smiling little girl, the missing posters, the family's emotional pleas. It was easy to sympathize, easy to repeat the narrative. But what lay below the waterline, that was never truly touched. The invisible part was made of omissions, unspoken agreements, closed-door meetings, diplomats who arrived too early, a media that, instead of investigating, chose to protect. And this isn't theory, it's a pattern, a behavioral pattern that repeats in stories where what's at stake isn't just a family's pain, but a country's image, a class's prestige, the interests of people far above. And when you get that, it feels like you're in a room that's always had a hidden door, but no one pointed it out, no one wanted it open. Now the question that remains is simple and unsettling. If this story was told to protect something, what exactly couldn't be revealed? Because sometimes the crime isn't in what happened. It's in the effort to keep the truth from surfacing. And if you've made it this far, you might already feel the weight of that void. The uneasy certainty that behind the most repeated version, there was a carefully written script, not to inform us, but to ensure certain questions were never asked. And that's exactly where everything changes. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next part of this story isn't about rewriting the past. It's about facing what was deliberately hidden and why. Now let's step through that door. The Madeleine McCann case has always been treated as a mystery, but maybe the real mystery isn't what happened that night. It's what was carefully told afterward. For years, we were fed images, words, and versions that seemed too comforting to be true. The narrative was handled with such control, such precision, that it felt more like an image campaign than a desperate search for justice. The invisible villain, the idealized drama, the well-placed silence, it all worked. Because most people don't want to question what seems resolved. But the truth, when it shows up, doesn't shout. It creeps in slowly, it unsettles. And when it arrives, it doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just dismantles everything we believed. Maybe that's why so many preferred to accept the official version. Because admitting we were deceived takes more courage than repeating what was handed to us ready-made. And that's where the story shifts focus. It stops being about a lost child and becomes about how we choose to see things, about how many times we accept what's convenient, even when we know something's off. We live in a time when well-crafted narratives get more space than raw facts, where emotions are manipulated before reason even has a chance to kick in. And that comes at a cost, because while the truth is ignored, time passes, and with it, the chances of real justice. The McCann case became a symbol of something bigger, the power to shape collective memory, to erase questions with headlines, to turn suspicions into blind solidarity, to make even silence seem legitimate, as long as it's nicely packaged. And maybe the scariest part is realizing this isn't an isolated case. Maybe Madeleine's story shows us, deep down, that the real danger isn't in inexplicable tragedies, but in the truths no one wants to hear. Some will watch all this and still say, but you can't prove it, and was never dug up again. But sometimes what really matters isn't what's documented, it's what was omitted with such care. If this video made you think differently, it's because you've already realized that the story you were told might not have been the real one. It was just the most comfortable, the most acceptable, the one that avoided confrontation. And if you felt that, you're not alone. More people are starting to ask the questions that were always brushed aside. More voices are rising, doubting, connecting dots that were ignored for too long. And that's not conspiracy theory. That's just the discomfort of clarity, the feeling that something's wrong, and no one had the guts to say it. So if you want to understand better how this kind of narrative is built and why it works so well, there's already another video waiting for you. A deep dive into the media's choices, the invisible scripts, the truths that don't make the headline but shape everything from within. This is content for those who don't settle for the surface. The kind of story that keeps you up at night but wakes up your conscience. And of course, if you made it this far, drop a comment below. I'm the one who doesn't forget. That way, I'll know you stuck with me to the end, and that you're the type who doesn't accept just any explanation because it's nicely wrapped. And before you go, check out the pinned comment. There's something there that'll shift how you see this in other cases. I won't say what it is, but if you felt what I felt making this video, you'll want to know. Some things we only understand when we stop accepting silence as an answer. And now that you've seen all this, what do you do with the doubt that's left?